they speak the I want them to speak the same language with you so that when you say, you know, according to the regulation in California for emergency response or emergency action plans, Title 8, Section 3220, that they speak the same language with you, that they know that you're not making it up, you're not trying to make their life difficult, that is simply because it is required and you go beyond the minimum required, because that's, after all, that's how we do safety. Or all of the people that are on my membership plan or that hire us through UCLA, the continuing education department, we also talk about how we can do beyond what is required by the regulation, because the regulation truly is the bare minimum. Okay, so you let me know, Lindsay, if this continues to be a bit of a problem, but some of the updates just before we start with emergency action response and how it's interesting. Everybody chooses the last quarter of the year to do emergency response. I don't know, but most of my clients do. They like to do drills. They like to do, you know, what are we going to do during a fire? What are we going to do an earthquake? So that's why I picked this topic for November. But I always do some updates, and I know it's flu and COVID. Well, it's not really COVID season because the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, say that it's not really, they haven't really pegged a season for COVID yet. So in the meantime, what we do is we watch the cases in our area, in our geographic area, and the people that we serve. And that's how we kind of go about prevention of COVID-19 at the workplace. Remember that COVID-19 becomes a little nightmarish if you start having a lot of cases, and then you start meeting the definition of outbreak. So you want to stay clear from that. And guess what's happening? What's happening this November? Well, gatherings and Christmas parties. And we start getting everybody together because it's fun, because we like to keep the morale and the friendship with our coworkers. Nothing wrong with that. But I do want you to be careful because it's very costly to have outbreaks at work. I want you to take a look at the new, well, it's not really new, but since June 2023, there's guidance and FAQs at the OSHA website. They guide you beautifully through some of the issues of what do I need to do to keep updated and to keep in compliance, okay? So with COVID-19, they took away the requirement to have a separate written program. So you can just have a policy that actually meets the requirements of the standard, which is going to be in place until beginning of 2025. So you have a full year of COVID-19 in place. So what I want you to do, guys, is remembering that because we have flu season that peaks in the months of December, February, just keep an eye out and making sure that if you're going to do your Christmas parties or any of your gatherings to celebrate at work, I'm just going to give you tips. This is not required, but I think that because we get federal government offering free testing, so they started again September 25th. You can request free testing, the test to take at home, or you can also find out where are the testing locations around your facility where people can get tested for free. Find that out so that you send them to be tested prior to having your holiday gatherings. That would be great. It would help you avoid people with symptoms coming onto your parties or your celebrations. So that's one of the best tips that I have for you today. Make sure it's not required by law, simply because this is a regulation that is still in place till the beginning of 2025, COVID-19 prevention. So one of the tips that I want to give you today is make sure you test people prior to the actual gathering or party or Christmas party and stuff like that. And it could be just a we recommend, right? Because you don't need to make it mandatory. This is not required by law, but it could be a nice recommendation for everyone who's going to be present at your party to get tested prior to going. That would make everyone more comfortable, and anybody with symptoms should stay home and follow the recommendations also for masking. That's the most asked question in regards of masking. Should we be masking for gatherings? Well, remember that the California Department of Public Health is who is now, for OSHA as well, dictating when do we mask. And what they say is from the moment your symptoms started, count from that in 10 days, right? So for 10 days, no matter if your symptoms went away or you returned to work, remember that what we do is once your fever has resolved without the use of medication, then we say, okay, if it's day 5 or more, and then your fever hasn't gone away, you're still contagious, don't come back to work. But if your fever goes away without the use of medication, you can come back to work. But if you're still at day 8 from when your symptoms started, you are required to mask at work, to wear one of those face coverings, okay? So remember, there's still some things in effect, and we need to continue to keep an eye out. Training is required as well. If you haven't done training in a long time, maybe right now is the time, because it's, flu season and people start having symptoms. They don't know if it's flu, they don't know if it's COVID. Do your training today. It's only required initially, but hey, if it's been more than a year or 2 that you did this training, please do so. COVID-19 is one of those topics that I recommend you revisit annually. It doesn't need to be very lengthy, but if you visit this OSHA COVID-19 guidance and resources, it'll tell you the 10 things you must discuss when you talk about COVID-19. All right, if you have more questions about this, you will get a copy of my slides. There's actually there a link on where to get free tests, the www.covid.gov//tests. All right, very nice. So what do we have? Oops, it went to my link. I'm so sorry. What do we have in regards to my learning objectives? By the way, I don't give you any more updates because what I see with OSHA is that some areas in our state are still having some heat issues. It's crazy. We are in November and we're having heat. So just probably 2 weeks ago, I received a notice for heat illness prevention in the Bay Area. So those are the news. Those are the news. And as we go along, also, we'll talk about some other issues here that are also affecting us, the safety of our workers as well. Okay, emergency prevention, understanding what is required by the California regulation. That's super important because there's a law. So what should we include in our plans? Emergency action programs, I see them in all colors, shapes, and forms. And when you guys ask me to review them, I will give you comments, or I will tell you, what, let's just start from scratch. So I want you to know what the California regulation requires that your program encompasses. Then the next one would be at least 3 things. Tell me, when you go out there, Alba, what do you see it's going wrong? Why are we having issues that could cause employees, fatalities or very serious injury to workers in case of an emergency? And I'll talk to you about some of these behaviors. Describe at least 2 action items to improve your emergency response at work. I have great tips for you. And then identifying elements of employee training. Okay, let's get going. And remember, you can always put your questions in the chat, and at the end, I will be tackling those. So there is the requirement. It's for Title 8, Section 3220, and then there's 6 items. If you read it, the way California regulation is written is not very user-friendly. That's just the truth. I don't know. I didn't write it down. Someone else did, but it's not very user-friendly. So I like to always, give you the bullet points. Number 1, emergency escape procedures. So you have to delineate the types of evacuation and the exit route assignments. What does that mean? It just means like a lot of words. Well, depending on the emergency, you could have evacuation that is shelter in place, or evacuating outside the building onto an assembly area or gathering area where people get accounted for, right? And then the exit route assignments. Who is going to make sure that everybody evacuated and close the doors, right? So that's what this means. Who's going to do what? Who is going to stay behind just to kind of shut down equipment or critical operations that you need to make sure, equipment is turned off, etc. Number 2, critical equipment shutdown procedures. Oh, sorry, that was into number 2. Then we get into head count procedures. Where are your assembly points? And who is going to account for people? And how are you going to accomplish this? Because many times you don't know. There's so many different variables on how you do business. Some people, for example, only send people out there in the field. So you have crews of workers out in the field. And once a month, they all get together headquarters, you have a production meeting, for example. Well, you have to have emergency evacuation response and plans for when everyone is at the building, and where would you assemble and account for them versus if they're out there in the field. And employees need to know, okay, if I'm out there in the field and I am alone, what should I do in case of a fire or in case of an earthquake? Or if I'm driving and a live power line falls and crushes my car, what should I do? They need to know this before it happens, because the worst thing is that these things occur, or someone is not feeling well, they don't say anything, they work alone, and then they have a heart attack or a seizure, some sort of, or heat illness, something, while they're alone working at any of your job sites, and then they are found dead somewhere in the middle of a parking lot, etc. That would not be fun. So you need to account for all of these types of emergencies, make your own list, and then how are we going to help these people so that this doesn't happen? This is all about prevention. After all, safety is about preventing from anyone getting hurt, right? So this is a huge portion of your safety plans. And most of the time, this is one that I always get asked to update or bring to up to date. Who is going to do rescue and medical duties? I just renewed my first aid CPR training. It's renewed every 2 years, and I loved it. I loved it. The training was done by Mr. Mercado. Jose and I had been working together for a little while, and you know, he is so highly recommended and so sought after. He's also bilingual, and his class is really fun. So we did have a lot of fun. We're going to talk about who is supposed to be doing first aid CPR. What are the medical duties? A lot of people, when I go out there and I say, hey, who is first aid CPR trained? And no one raises their hand. And then, you know, employers go, well, I didn't think I was required to have any trained personnel. Okay. We'll talk about that too. Preferred means of reporting emergencies. So you have to have an alarm system or a way to communicating with employees when there's an emergency and everybody has to evacuate, get out of the building. Is it a fire? Is it earth? What is it? So preferred means reporting. And what means what? How does it sound? Or is it bright lights? Do you have disabled people where, you know, the lighting or they couldn't hear the alarm? You need to know your employees in order to know what kind of alarm is the most appropriate for you as well. And names of the job titles of employees responsible for the plan. This is very interesting. Not every single California regulation requires that you have the responsible people on the plan. This one does. For any other given plan, I always put a responsible person because it is a good idea. I don't know why they don't require it for every single written program, but I guess it's just because they assume that you're going to designate someone and a job title will be on your program saying this is the person in charge of it or who administers the plan. But the IIPP requires a responsible person or who administers it. Same thing here for emergency action plan. We need to know who does what and kind of delineate who's responsible for this plan as well, who administers it. So those are the requirements. But then after those 6 bullet points, which are not very clearly delineated, you have the extra requirements, which is interesting. It'll talk about an alarm system according to Article 165. Article 165, if you look it up in the OSHA website, you'll find that it's everything about these alarm systems, that it needs to be audible, and it needs to be tested according to manufacturer's recommendations, that you know, employees, that you need to account for employees with disabilities. Can they hear it? Can they see it? Is it going to cause a problem and they're going to have seizures because of the type of light that it is emitting? So if you don't have an alarm system, or if your alarm system is old and you don't remember when you set it up, take a look at Article 165. Just do it in the search box of your OSHA website. You're going to find all of the requirements there. So it has to be according to Article 165. Next, evacuation. So now you have to talk about how to evacuate for each of the possible emergencies. Like I said, sometimes it's shelter in place, sometimes means get out of the building and assemble, and some other times it means get out of the building and run and keep running. And you're thinking, what is she talking about? I'm talking about situations such as active shooter worth of federal emergency management with the emergency FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. Oh my goodness, why was that so hard for me to say? They recommend to run, hide, or fight. Commit to the action. So if you're able to run in the opposite direction where the shooting is coming, stay running. And if you're getting out of the building and there's some response from police, just make sure you keep your arms up, that kind of thing. Keep running till you are away, far away, so you're not going to be assembled, right? So this is why it's evacuation for each of the possible emergencies. And then the last of the extra requirements for this regulation is training, making sure people are trained. And when we say training, we want to make sure that people, a sufficient number of workers that need to assist during an evacuation is trained. And what do you need to train them on? Okay, so you're going to be in charge of your department. This is the training portion, okay? You're going to be in charge of your department. And so what you do is when there's an evacuation, as you're sweeping your floor, and that doesn't mean you go back, especially if there's a fire, you don't go back towards where the fire is at to go and sweep. You actually move forward, closing doors and checking that people are not being trapped in the building or left behind in restrooms or any cubicles, etc. Sufficient number of people to cover the area of work that assist you in properly evacuating, right? And why do we say closing doors? Because remember, closing doors is part of when there's a fire, making sure that the fire doesn't spread to other parts of the building. So sufficient number of people knowing how to assist so that the evacuation can take place in a safe and orderly manner. And then letting know each employee, your responsibility is just to evacuate. If you hear the alarm and the fire alarm sounds, your responsibility is to evacuate. So they need to know initially. Before they start working for you, you need to make sure that you have an actual period of safety training, or what we call the new employee safety orientation, right? And for some of you, it takes half an hour. Some of you take a few days. I have a company, depending how large the company and where the company designates that this group of employees may need a more extensive safety training. They will do a full week prior to the person starting any work with them. That's a great idea. So make sure they get their safety training prior to them starting work for you. So give them this information initially. Anytime the responsibilities change, especially if they will get promoted, etc. And so right now it's as you do a to-do list for all of those promotions. Make sure that as they get into this new job, the description of job duties includes also those updated responsibilities under the emergency action program and how to protect themselves during an emergency, right? And then make sure that they know where can they get a copy of this program. Is it in writing? Where can I find it? Is it easy for me to print a copy? It should be. Goodness gracious, Mike. Always about half an hour into this talk, my English start acting up. Okay, so any questions, just let me know, right? But things that go wrong. Okay, so now let me talk about the things that I see out there in the field, because I've been doing a lot of drills lately in helping companies and my clients talking about behaviors and things that don't help you in the long run. So number one, employee don't remember what to do. They just can't remember what to do. And the reason they don't remember what to do during an emergency is because we don't practice enough. We don't take the time to do drills. So that's a to-do for you. When was the last time that you actually held a drill, an emergency evacuation drill? Now, as you write your notes today, I wanted to know that many of you tell me, well, we sat down and we discussed what to do during an emergency. That's okay, kind of like a table discussion of what to do during an emergency. And that's your first step, really, truly, towards planning and towards appropriate emergency response. A table discussion where you bring the heads of the department and they're going to tell you, okay, this is what we can do. This is who should stay behind to, shut down equipment. This is who's going to help us sweep. This is my evacuation warden will be situated here and here and here, or for each department. That's what you do during a table discussion. But don't stop there, because that's where you stop. Many of you stop right there. Just have a table discussion of what to do during an emergency, but you never do an actual drill. You don't practice it with your workers because it's costly for the company, for everybody to stop, evacuate the building. For some of you, it takes half an hour. Some of you it takes 45 minutes. And that's of paid time doing, this whole drill. Is it important? Super important. Where are the issues and the behaviors that should be discouraged? When people hate your drills and they're actually staying back and hide in their office while everyone else is doing the drill, they stay hidden behind. Well, people have gotten trapped in buildings because they think it's another drill. And this happened many years ago in a museum, I think because of the type of extinguishing agent that museums use. Someone was asphyxiated and died in their office, not even because of a smoke inhalation, but because the actual activation of halon gas in the museum, because it displaces oxygen, and the person died. And this is because he thought it was a drill. And so clear communication of when these drills are going to happen, and practicing, and why is it important to actually do them with us, right? Also, some people think that because there's fire extinguishers all over your facility, that during a fire, they should use a fire extinguisher. The truth is, guys, during a fire, what you want to do is evacuate. Call 911, let the experts handle it. There are very few types of occupations that require that the people handling a fire extinguisher actually uses it. And for the most part are welders. Can you see how simple it is for us to understand why welders should be trained within the last, is required within the last 12 months, hands-on in the use of a fire extinguisher? And that's because, hey, they're doing fire watches after their job is done, or after they're welding, soldering, or cuttering with the hot work. So you can see why. But for the most part, if there's a fire, people that have not been trained shouldn't take it upon themselves to break the glass and get those fire extinguishers and fight with a little plastic tab that sometimes takes a little bit of a twist to get it to break and use the fire extinguisher. So evacuate and ensure that you have an actual instruction sheet that you develop, and during your drill you discuss and you talk about whether or not people did this or not, such as who is the person in charge of doing your actual sweeps, and did you close the doors as you exited out? Did you make sure people just exited calmly through the closest exit route to the exit door? And did you make sure that this person also verified that no one was running, or people did not come back and retrieve purses, lunches, keys? Because that's what you see sometimes during drills, that people are, oh wait, I forgot my coat, or oh wait, I forgot. Those are behaviors, those are problems, because it's an emergency. People need to know that's not what you would do during an emergency, right? The last thing that I see that it is common during an actual emergency, because I've been to 2 different actual emergencies. One of them was a fire, and I was in the 13th floor of a building. I was doing actually a seminar, safety, 10-hour safety for a company. One of the employees had a walker, had ankle surgery, and he was disabled for the time being. And the alarm sounded. And guess what? The actual impulse, and this is me, I'm talking about me, my personal experience. I wanted to help this person. I didn't want to leave him alone. I just can't. I mean, there's a fire, and how are you going to get down? Because everybody was evacuating through the stairs, and he cannot go down the stairs. He cannot go down the steps because he's got a walker and he's got a cast, and his ankle has had surgery just recently. So he knows he cannot go down 13 floors. What should you do? And this is something that needs to be discussed with people. You cannot stay. Why? Because paramedics, emergency responders, firefighters always tell you, it's better for me to go back and rescue 1 person than 2, right? So talk about it so that people know that they're going to be faced with the need of helping others. But if they can't, for example, in this situation, specific situation of having to evacuate because of a fire, and not being able to help a person with disability, that you do need to evacuate and inform immediately where that person is at, so that rescuers proceed to help. It is important for people to disclose their disability. And, most of the time, your wonderful HR people have done the legwork, and they know who will need special accommodations during an emergency. So this needs to be done today, after today's class. It's a to-do for you guys that are in charge of safety. Who are the people with disabilities? Where are they? Are they out there in the field? Are they in your buildings? What are they doing? How are you going to help them during an emergency? Can they hear? Can they see? Do they need access to wheelchair? Are they on a wheelchair? Do they use a cane? So anything that is a disability needs to be accounted for because of their disability. Next would be, why are we concerned, right? Every employee could be faced with an emergency at any time, and every employee needs to know how to get help during an emergency. That is the issue. Okay, so now you make your list. So when I go out there and we do training, depending on where the training is happening, if it's actually to employees, you can use the last portion of my slideshow to actually do training or get some of the tips on how to do training for employees. But if it is to upper management and you're trying to put together your emergency response, the first thing to do as you do your table discussion is to discuss what are the types of emergencies that you are faced with, right? And so it goes from, oh, earthquake, it's California, fire, I have a bunch of chemicals over there, wildfires, it's California. We do have a lot of wildfires that also occur. Medical emergencies that could happen to anybody, and that in that specific type of emergency, we see a lot of those heat illness issues because people start fainting or throwing up and fainting, and then you need to call 911. So medical emergencies, these are huge. So these are kind of like the basic types of emergencies for California organizations. Chemical spills. You would be surprised how many manufacturers, medium-sized, small and medium-sized manufacturers I visit, and they have not trained their people on how to contain a chemical spill. They kind of rely on, oh, there's a spill kit and that's it. Is it really? Fallen power lines, especially for those that drive, because you're thinking, we're not electricians. We don't deal with electricity. Some of the cities that do not have buried power lines, and then we talk about those emergencies where people dig, landscapers dig, construction guys dig. A lot of people that dig are not trained to actually call and before they dig, right? And that's another thing going on, but power lines. And there's a ton of things hidden underground for those of you working in newer residential settings, right? So all of those things need to be taken into account for emergencies. Is this something that could constitute an emergency? Power outages, active shooter. Nowadays, unfortunately, we have had so many, I think up until November, we've had more than 30,000 people who died in our nation because of gun violence. So active shooter for any organization is something that needs to be discussed, and people need to receive training. There are some things that you need to do for prevention, and one of those is walk around your buildings and find out where are your weak points. So that's up to do for you guys today. Walk around your buildings. Take a look at every single entrance point. Push those doors in. Pretend you're trying to come in and shoot people, God forbid, and push those doors in. And is it easy to come in? Are people going to ask you why you're coming through that area? Or is it just free for all? There's no problem coming in from any given point in your facility. So where are your weak points and how can you tackle those so that you don't have the issues of strangers or even people that are known to your employees coming into your facilities unannounced or to create a problem such as workplace violence or active shooter situations. Okay, so make your own list. Think of past experiences too. What have you had in the past that may not be in the list? Some of you have had terrorist threats or bomb threats. Okay, so also, and that was pretty common in back in 2011, 2012, when we had the anthrax and all of those terrorist phone calls and bomb threats. So that should be, past experiences should be a lesson. You should have it. You should also discuss it. You should also drill and practice because people forget. Okay, so and you can use some of these slides also for your training. When you talk about fire, we talk about pulling an alarm. What is your alarm? What if you don't have a pull station? I don't have a pull station. Okay, so are you going to notify people about a fire verbally? If they're going to use just verbal notices, people need to know. You yell fire, you know? So this is something that goes into training. You tell them, what is your alarm system? If it's going to be verbally communicated, or if you have an actual pull station, or if you're going to actually hear an actual voice over system, because that's what you have in your facility. Talk to them about it and how does it sound, and do it during your drill so that they hear the ringing, so that they hear the noise, they see the lighting. Send out the evacuation alert, and ask people to actually proceed to the nearest evacuation, wherever they are. Maybe they walk to somebody else's office, wherever they are, it's the closest route. Have them walk around and know at least 2 ways of getting out of the building. People need to know this, at least 2 ways. Children get taught to always go into a building and kind of look around and say, okay, 2 ways of going out of the building, because in case of a fire, you need to know so you don't get trapped. And assembly areas, make sure that they are not near traffic areas. You don't want people to get killed out in traffic. They didn't get killed in the fire, but now they get, smashed by a truck or whatever. So good assembly areas means safe areas where you know that a structure of a building is not going to fall on them, or they are not being exposed to, areas with chemicals, for example. Don't make them assemble in areas that are dangerous as well. So safe, secure, and then you account for them. Some of the problematic behaviors here is, I went over this, drills that are not taken seriously, etc. The next emergency on my list has to do with inclement weather, wildfires, etc. We do get some of these in California. One of the best things you can do to help your people is having someone who watches the weather. So assign someone who's always looking out for weather alerts. And this never occurred to you. You're thinking, oh yeah, there's a safety person in our office. He's a safety director. He has so many things in his mind. He does so much for the safety of the crew that whenever there's a wildfire, people may be already out there in the field and is like, oh wow, we did have a warning, but no one was watching for the weather. So who alerts to the weather conditions? Have someone who's constantly updating themselves and sending notices to all the crews. There's a wildfire, there's smoke, you shouldn't be out there. Don't send them out there. Or, there's a flood, whatever is happening, that someone knows what's happening constantly, even for heat, right? So that they alert your crews. Ask always for status and updates. Are they at a safe location? And if they can't be working at a safe location that they out, you need to know and be ready and what to do in case of a wildfire, right? And you need to listen to the authorities. Most of the time they tell you which roads to use so that you can evacuate and go away from the fire. That's basically what it is, be away from the fire. And you need to give people time to go back home to their families, because many times the fire is where their homes are. So people also need to go and tend to their families and exit and get their paperwork, whatever it is. So this is also nice for them to know that because you've seen bad weather coming up, that you care for their safety, even if they're not going to be at their job site, but they're going to be at home, that that they need to prepare their families. This is prior to the actual fire getting to their residence. So all of this is part of keeping people safe. You're thinking, oh, I don't care if they're at home, they're at home. They need to do their own thing. Well, it's, like I said in the beginning, always doing more than what you are required, helping people to stay safe, preparing beforehand. That's what safety is all about. Prevention. The next one on my list was chemical spill. And this one is something that I've seen quite often, where spills occur every day, all day long, especially manufacturing, and people are used to them. And they clean them up. Oil spills, acetone spills, solvent spills, all sorts of spills. They know how to clean them up. They're small spills, but they are not sure what to do if a bigger spill happens, right? So the first thing is to have that talk, to do the training, to be familiar, to tell the guys in that area. And some of these workers don't even know what's around them, the chemicals that are around them. But when you take the time to say, listen, you're working in this area, and right next to you, there's totes of oil, lubricating oil that comes in every month. And we move it out of there, but one day or for a day or 2 days, when you are working in your regular station, you're actually near, and you tell them types of chemicals. So this is what would happen if there was a spill. You allow them to read this safety data sheet, and you allow them to locate the spill kits, or what are their actions supposed to be. Many of them is just recognizing there's a spill and evacuating, right? Some of them is recognizing there's a spill and actually containing it. But what I found most times it's lacking is the actual training on how to use the spill kit. So I see these big drums. Some of you have the little spill kits, and that's fine. But some of you for manufacturing more medium size to larger size, you have the big spill kits, you know, because a large spill could occur. So, but people have never looked inside. They're like, oh, whoa, I didn't know this exists, you know, and they look in, oh, there's even gloves and an apron and, you know, and kitty litter. They need to know the content so that it doesn't take them by surprise and they don't start trying to figure out how to use the spill kit. This should be trained and talked about before the spill happens. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the issues that I found most times is not happening. You're thinking, come on, it's common sense. Yes, a lot of these things are common sense, but common sense is a superpower. Not everybody possesses it. So you got to take a look at what you have. Some of you may not even have spill kits and you want to order them and then start talking to people about at what level of response you want to train them. Because remember, with hazardous materials, there's all the way to very technical knowledge where you actually send them out to have this very specialized training, okay? But for those that are just trained to recognize there's a spill or pick up a small spill, train them in the use of their spill kits and train them in the use of the safety data sheet so that they know that the safety data sheet has a section that says, hey, what to do in case this thing spills and it's a small spill. What to do in case this thing spills and it's a large spill. It's in the safety data sheets. The problem is we're not taking the time to actually go over it, get that spill kit out. Because once again, it could be 5 people that get taken away from their stations because they are in an area where these spills could occur, and training them and telling them the location of the spill kits. That's another thing. Many times those spill kits are not located near where the spills could happen. They're somewhere else, and people need to go scramble and look for them when the actual spill occurs. So go back to your floors today and find out that those spill kits are where they will be needed. The medical emergency is something that most of the time doesn't get practiced and does not get really talked about because you're thinking, well, we do have a few of the first aid trained people. They're the ones that would do it. We don't, you know, we don't do anything. We don't touch people. We don't. Okay, so let's discuss a little bit of this. And a medical emergency could happen to any one of you in this call. For the most part, I always ask by a show of hands if you've been first aid CPR trained, right? And in small to medium-sized companies, I'll see a few hands come up. I get very pleased when I have an entire, 10 hands come up. If it's a group of 50 people, that's really nice, right? Because you know that they're on top of having at least one person per crew or department. And these people have been trained to voluntarily help during a medical emergency, right? They're not forced to do it, but because they have that demeanor where they want to do it, they've raised their hand and say, I want to get trained, so I help in case of an emergency. Okay, those people actually get to ask permission, say, can I touch you? May I help you, right? Because that's how their training goes. May I help you? Consent is received, and then they go on and help and apply a tourniquet, for example, and there's blood and they know the basics of bloodborne pathogens, put that barrier, etc. For those of you that are not trained, the best thing you can do is do not touch this person. Get help. So you say, okay, buddy, I can see you're bleeding. Let's make sure I'll get you the first aid kit, and that person starts applying pressure themselves. You do not do it for them. Remember, this is all training before the emergency happens, because the way this thing can go wrong on you is when someone gets cut at your manufacturing plant. You've never discussed what to do in case of a medical emergency. And that employee and his coworker, neither of them is first aid CPR trained. And so they start like, oh man, you're bleeding. And they just start grabbing rags. And now the coworker has blood all over his uniform and you name it. So that person, you're not trained, have the injured person administer self-help. Either raise the arm, apply pressure, you bring him the kid, someone's calling, yell for help. Now you have 2 more people there making a decision, supervisors being called, 911 needs to be called, maybe not, but many times it does. And then if you come in contact with bodily fluids, I always give them this acronym, which I created, and is WISH. You wish it didn't happen to you, right? I use it for all of my bloodborne pathogens training, and it means wash the area where you got splashed or where you got blood on yourself. If it's your hands, if it's your face, wash with soap and water. The I stands for informing your supervisor. You have to tell your supervisor you were exposed to bodily fluids at work, so inform. S is for source individual. The person whose blood or bodily fluid got on you, that person needs to be tested to see if they have anything in their blood that could make you sick. And when we talk about bloodborne pathogens that get transmitted occupationally, we talk about hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and HIV, right? So we need to know the source individual. And for some of you, knowing the source individual when you get in contact with bodily fluids, it's impossible, right? Maybe because you work in picking up trash at shelters. How will you ever know? Health works, and the H at the end is for health. That means your health is very important. You have to have prophylaxis treatment to prevent you from coming down with any of these diseases that are transmitted in the blood or by the blood or bodily fluids of other people. So you should have a hotline also for a clinician to help in case you do know that these kinds of injuries where there is blood and bodily fluids is quite common at your facilities. And this clinician makes always a great recommendation, and it's a hotline that you call them and they ask you questions. How much blood? What was the entry route? For example, was it injected? Was it with cut glass or any material that punctured the skin? Was it a splash? How much blood? How much bodily fluids? Was it visibly contaminated with blood? Was it just vomit and it was not visibly contaminated with blood? They ask all those questions in order to find out how do they take care of this person. And that's the H for wish, right? It is important that you trained employees to report coming in contact with blood and bodily fluids right away, because the treatment and the care that they get can or may be started or is recommended to be started within the next hour or so. Okay. If trained in first aid, CPR, these people are trained to ask for permission and to stay within the confinements of their training. They cannot try and be the heroes and all of a sudden come up with this awesome idea to take care of this injured person. It has to be within their training and their training guidelines. Yell for help. So yelling for help is very important because two heads think better than one, especially if you have an injured employee, somebody who's bleeding or fainted or having a seizure. When you yell for help, someone else can actually be there to assist, to call 911 if needed. And always report all injuries and near misses to a supervisor immediately, and repeat this to your workers. Repeat them that they need to report it right away. They can't wait. So administering self-help is something that I see that most of the time workers get not told about and they get not trained about. Their instinct kicks in, and during a medical emergency, they just want to help. And so they get bodily fluids on them, or they don't know that if the person is conscious, they should be able to administer self-help. And then supervisor would make a determination as to, hey, let me drive you to the clinic, or no, we need to call paramedics. Super important to talk about this one. For workplace violence, because these are increasing, you should have a zero tolerance policy in writing. You should have a workplace violence program separate from your other programs. A lot of you just have a small policy that it is included in your safety manual. But if you take a look at Cal OSHA, they do have a very similar breakdown of a workplace violence policy, similar to an injury and illness prevention program. It starts with who administers the program, a name, and that's important because if you have an issue where, let's say, bullying is occurring at your workplace, you would want workers to know that so-and-so is in charge of this policy. So you can go up to her or him and talk to them about what's going on so that they get a hold of this, and there's counseling that takes place in order for the bullying to stop. Needs to be reported immediately, but you also need to train people on recognition of signs, right? Signs like if you know that bullying is something that is happening in construction, this is quite the thing, okay? Bullying in construction, the construction trades, it starts because, teasing amongst new workers or newly hired people because the more experienced guys, just want to tease the new guy. That's bullying. And so teaching them, there's great videos also for this type of thing. I might send you a link for that video that I have for Stop Bullying in Construction. And that's put by WorkSafe BC, which I love their videos as well. And you should use them for training as well. So recognize the signs. This is all included into your training. And when we talk about issues of potential violence, if you know that you haven't had refresher training or you haven't tackled the issue of mass shootings or active shooting at your facility, an ounce of prevention, right? We always talk about prevention. We need to talk about what are the indicators of people becoming violent, and we know that there's the term there of going postal and refers back to that term where there were instances where people that were disgruntled and were fired, they would come back and shoot their coworkers. And it occurred many years ago at a post office, or it was a postal employee. And that's why they said going postal became the phrase. Nowadays is going crazy, everyone, because we have an issue with mental health. I really, truly believe that. But until we get a hold of that, we're going to be dealing with a lot of this. And of course, without getting into politics and everything else about gun violence, we do know that this is happening. So from the standpoint of you being the safety director, you being the manager, what can you do to stay or to keep your people safe? Well, and a lot of people just, through my years of experience, people tell me, if someone comes with a gun at you, and I'm not talking a little gun, but we're talking about mass shootings, truly, where, this weapons are getting more sophisticated. And you are sitting at the facility, or you're in the way, you're going to die. There's no other way to prevent this type of issue. Well, the Federal Emergency Management Agency says, FEMA says, start by walking around your facilities and finding the weak points. Next, start by finding out if training has taken place where people know that if this occurs, what could they do? Run, fight, hide. Play videos, train, practice. Talk about issues of potential violence at the workplace and how also domestic violence can spill into the workplace. And talk about people reporting those things to you so that you also put preventative measures in place. For example, if someone tells you, I am nervous, I've been having some issues of domestic violence, and I actually have had some threats that this person is going to come and hurt me, and he knows where I work or she knows where I work, and I am concerned. A picture of that person, making sure you deny access to this type of visitors or people that just show up at the workplace. Knowing that, do you have any methods to actually convey and gather this information? A lot of the people haven't even thought about it. Oh, that's true. We've never really discussed with our workers that if they have issues of domestic violence that may trickle into the workplace, that they should tell us before anything happens, and how are we going to put measures in place? The Federal Emergency Management Agency also puts a list of indicators for potential violence, which is the ones that I have on your screen. And those are depression, withdrawal. And I joke because some people go, what do you mean depression? We all get depressed once in our life. Well, this is where training is super important. If you have a coworker who's usually, more on the sulky side, more to himself, he's always quiet. To you, he's kind of depressed because you're a very outgoing person. He's always depressed. If that's his usual demeanor, that's not what this is referring to. This is referring to something that is out of the normal. This person's demeanor is not like that. And then all of a sudden they're, withdrawing and showing signs of depression and kind of like disregard for your usual company policies, such as not getting there on time or not coming to work when he's supposed to, or delivering on time. And then he has or she has outbursts of anger and rage and paranoia, kind of like everybody's against me. Oh, did you see that? I know he's after me or she's after me. Oh yeah, they got it out for me. And then escalation and spillover of domestic problems, which I talked about, or talking about financial problems that are severe and, the whole world kind of is coming down on them. And talk that is outside of the normal, talk that it's more onto the odd side of things where, there's an issue on the news, for example, that has to do with gun violence or mass shooting, and this person says or comments in a cluster of everything we've discussed up to now per your slide here in front of you. They're showing several of these potential indicators, potential violence indicators. They're showing several of them. And on top of that, you hear them commenting, yeah, they had it coming, you know, type of thing. A comment that is odd, that is very out of character. All of those things tells you this person is not in the right mental health. And you're not a person who is a specialist, but training coworkers, because this is an issue that is prevalent right now in our society, has become important too, even though they're not trained health workers, that they need to recognize signs in other coworkers so that they help us to peg, counsel, prevent. There's a video by the Federal Emergency Management Agency that it is short and it's really good. It's a 7-minute video. I usually play it for minute 127 to minute 640 because it makes the video 5 minutes, especially if you're you have time constraints for training. And it really is awesome to show what do they mean by run, hide, and fight, which is, you know, you hear the gunshots, how and they portray them in the video. There's no blood, but you need to know, how does it sound? So a lot of people have never heard a gunshot, right? How does it sound? And then what should we do depending on where you work? Should you hide? Should you try and evacuate? And for the most part, depends where you're at. If evacuation is possible away from where you hear the shots coming, that's what you should do. Run and hands up because responders are coming, and so that they see you have no weapons, and getting away from there and reporting to your supervisor you're A-okay and out of the building. And looking into more sophisticated ways of communicating, such as texting, etc., so that people that are coming into work don't go to the building if there's something like this going on. And committing to your choice of action. So it's all in the video. It's a very good video. Okay, enough of that. And last but not least, we're in California, earthquakes happen. So prior to an earthquake, and there's a lot of these emergencies that we listed that you can do something prior to the actual emergency, like with the spills, chemical spills. You have to do training. Let them see what's in that spill kit. How would they use it? Discuss what are the chemicals that are going to spill if ever, and how do they handle that? They need to be trained. Otherwise, they do not touch or try and deal with that spill. Same thing with earthquakes. I ask them to drop, cover, and hold on. We do this. So I say, okay, guys, it's actually shaking. And I'll ask them to drop, take cover, hold on. And so we practice it. And it's so important because when we drop on our knees, we kind of just drop on our knees and go low. But as you see on the picture, you need to train them to protect their spine, because if something lands right on their neck, it's going to knock them out, and then more things will fall and crush them. But once you protect your neck, you can crawl to a safer space. So instead of walking or running, you're protecting your spine and your internal organs by being in this position. You have to explain it to them, right? So that they, by kinesthetically doing it, it just clicks in. And next time there's an earthquake, they know what to do. So this little infographic will tell you what to do if you are in a wheelchair or you have a walker, and that's very nice. But there's videos, and these videos are put out by shakeout.org. They just had a drill where you, and this is awesome, it was done October 19th. So every year they have a shakeout.org drill nationwide, and you actually get on you register for the drill. Your entire facility does it, and you get a certificate that you participated. And I think that's wonderful for the purposes of documenting training, to have a certificate of participation through the shakeout.org. It tells you how many people participated, because they'll ask you these questions. And then at the end, they also give you tips on how to improve your drills. There's a video on what to do while driving if there's an actual earthquake. And many a time when you're driving, a power line will fall in front of you or on your car, and what to do. You know, do not come outside, do not touch windows because they may be energized. So this video is a 2-minute video that tells you what to do during an earthquake, especially if there's fallen power lines. Shakeout.org has all of these videos, okay? And what not to do during an earthquake. So also talk about, do not run. A lot of people have been lucky enough to go outside during an earthquake, and they survive and they're like, oh, that's what you need to do, run. Statistically, though, when you walk or run to the outside of a building, you are more likely to suffer fatal or very severe injuries, because it is as if someone is moving the floor from under you or taking the carpet, the rug from under you. So what you want to do is drop, take cover, hold on. Another very bad myth is, get under the frame of a door and just hold on to it. More people go to the hospital because of broken fingers. So you need to discuss what not to do during an earthquake. And of course, not using stairs or elevators. So remember, your emergency action plan is required, in particular by OSHA, and in Cal OSHA is section 3220, and it needs to be in writing. There is an exception for very small employers. If you have less than 10 employees, it could be discussed verbally, orally, so people know what to do, because it's very small organization. Do I say A-okay? No. Anything, even if you have a small company of less than 10 employees, anything that you do safety-wise, document it, get their signatures, how long you spend discussing this thing, because it's important that you have proof of training. And make sure that you ensure employee safety by discussing the types of emergencies that you could have. Any questions? I'm open to questions. I will see you the first Friday of December for our monthly updates webinar. Thank you again for your time. And don't forget, I'm here to help with any questions that you may have. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you, Lindsay, for everything as always, and talk soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alba. Thanks, everyone. We'll send stuff out after this. So,
thank you, guys.
Have a good Thanksgiving.
Oh, happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, Lindsay.